Okay, folks, quick today, going to talk about Jackson and the Nullification Crisis. But before I actually get into that, I need to remind you of something that this guy right here talked about. And if you don't remember him, kind of important dude. George Washington, first president, father of his country, no big deal. But when we talked about Washington, one of the big things that we talked about with him was towards the end of his presidency, and that was his farewell address when he warned against political parties. He said that we shouldn't form political alliances that were permanent with European countries, and we pretty much didn't listen. So looking back in hindsight, Washington should really just be like, really, America? Like, like, really, America? You just didn't listen to anything that I said. But one of the other things that we didn't discuss very thoroughly was the fact that in Washington's farewell address, he warned against this thing called sectionalism. Oh no, I gotta fix the slide. Seamless editing. Okay, so sectionalism. Washington warns against it. So what is sectionalism? It is essentially where you only care about your one part of the country. You only care about its values, its economy. You don't really care about the rest of what's going on in the nation. You care about what's happening in your particular region that you are living in, and that's all that you are concerned about. So, like for instance, the North and the South. These are two sections. These are two parts of the United States. The South, they care about slavery and the growth of cash crops, and that's really just about it. That's all that they are concerned with within their own economy. And then on the other side, you have the North. They care about tariffs and American industry and ensuring there is a high tariff, so there isn't really any foreign competition. So Washington warns against this sectionalism, and of course, because nobody listens to George Washington, we don't listen to it. In fact, we actually go so far as to draw a literal line between the North and the South when the Missouri Compromise is passed. So not only are we kind of ignoring sectionalism, but we're kind of encouraging it by saying, hey, let's just draw a line. This is the North, and this is the South, and this is what's going to happen down here, and this is what's going to happen up here. So sectionalism is a bad thing that we know about, we've been warned against, but we're just not paying attention to any of the issues that are rising up and kind of pushing that issue later down the road for somebody else to deal with in the 1820s during Jackson's presidency. And so that's going to lead to some issues because the South is kind of focused on this one thing that's happening in the United States, and that's the tariff. They're really, really upset by it. And when it's passed, everybody is very outspoken about how bad the tariff is. Now, the North, they like the tariff. They love this tariff because it makes American industry more competitive. The tariff makes foreign goods more expensive, so people are buying more American-based goods. It's helping Northern American manufacturing grow and prosper because people aren't buying foreign goods anymore. They're trying to buy more American goods because they're cheaper. So they're pretty happy about that tariff, whereas on the opposite side of the fence, you have the American South. They're still having to buy these foreign goods. They're having to have a lot of their things imported, so they're particularly upset by this tariff. So, one guy who's particularly outspoken about this tariff is this Frankenstein-looking guy. His name is John C. Calhoun, and he is actually the vice president of Andrew Jackson during his administration. And so he is from South Carolina, originally served in the Senate for South Carolina as their representative. And so he doesn't like the tariff, and he's very outspoken against it. And he says essentially, all right, we're going to call up some old Jefferson ideas, and we're going to say this tariff, we can just nullify it. The states have rights, and they can just void out federal laws like Jefferson said you could do with the Alien and Sedition Acts. So they say, all right, the South doesn't like this tariff. South Carolina doesn't like this tariff. And so since the state doesn't like it, the state can just ignore it. They can void it. They can nullify it, which leads to the nullification crisis. Them choosing actively not to pay this tariff. And so South Carolina says, all right, if you want to make us pay this tariff then, like if you force us into paying this tariff that we don't want to pay, then we'll just up and leave. We'll secede from the United States altogether. We'll become the independent country of South Carolina, and you won't have to worry about us paying the tariff anymore because we won't even be a part of the country. And so Jackson has to respond to this. This is called secession. And so one of the things the president has to do is enforce the law and make sure the Union is preserved, to make sure all the states stay a part of the United States. And so he's like, oh, heck no, South Carolina, you are not going to do that. You are not going to secede from the Union. And guess what? Also, I'm going to make you pay this tariff. And so he very quickly has Congress pass this thing called the Force Bill, which is nothing like you would expect it to be. does is it allows Andrew Jackson to send himself and the military down into South Carolina in order to ensure that they can enforce that tariff and also to stop South Carolina from seceding. So Jackson takes himself and the military down there, if necessary, to make sure that South Carolina stays a part of the Union and ensures that that federal tariff is enforced. Well, calmer heads prevail. Andrew Jackson doesn't end up sending the military down into South Carolina, which he kind of actually really wanted to do because he didn't like John C. Calhoun very much. But this guy, Henry Clay, ends up coming up with a compromise. Calmer heads prevail, and he says, hey, instead of, going down to South Carolina and killing a bunch of people, why don't we instead just pull a Walmart and lower our prices? Why don't we just lower the tariff instead? So that'll make the South happy because the tariff is decreased, but the tariff is still around. That way the government is still making money, and Americans are still buying American goods that are less expensive than foreign goods. And so Henry Clay passes this compromise, the tariff is lowered, and the South is pretty happy about that. So what do we end up learning out of the nullification crisis? Like, what is the long-term meaning and the ramifications of it? Well, one, it shows that there is a difference between the North and the South. Those sectional tendencies between the North and the South increase significantly. Southerners really start to think of themselves as Southerners, separate from the rest of the United States, with their own prerogatives, with their own goals, with the things that they feel are most important. On top of that, we see that Southern states start to use the idea of secession and states' rights as a justification for ignoring federal laws or seceding and leaving the United States altogether. They say the states have rights, and if the federal government just ignores them, then they have the right to leave the Union if they want to and form their own separate country. If the federal government is ignoring them and what they want, then they could just leave. They claim states' rights. And then lastly, we see that the president can use force in order to stop secession from happening. He can use the military, he can use whatever action he deems necessary, because one of his ultimate jobs as president is to ensure that the United States and the union of all those states together is protected and make sure that it is a permanent one. So all of that put together is called the Nullification Crisis, and this is, really the big beginnings of the Civil War, because Southern states see what South Carolina wanted to do by seceding and go, hey, maybe we can do that. Like, maybe that's an idea that we can kind of take on later down the road. So that's the Nullification Crisis, and we'll cover the Bank War in class.